Hello and welcome to Vir2us News. I'm your host Pliskin, and my guest today is Vir2us Competitive Director, Miss Amber.
Hello everyone, welcome to our update to Smite patch 514 and most importantly, the release of Smite's first Polynesian goddess, Pele.
Thank you, Amber, and thank you, fans, for tuning into our debut. Vir2us News will continue to serve you with coverage of every Smite and Hearthstone patch, with deeper coverage of more of your favorite games as we expand and grow. And don't forget to share your thoughts on the new patch with us on Twitter, at Vir2usGG, or by leaving us a comment below. We've got your first look at Smite's 97th god, Pele, and we'll be making a visit to the Vir2us News rumor mill, but first, let's talk about core game changes coming to us in patch 514. Continuing on their Project Olympus changes to the core game of Smite, Hi-rez has moved Bakasura, Scylla, and Vimana to have their camera height adjusted to 64. Amber, why is this important?
This is really important because every god has a standard height of about 64 minus the really tall gods such as like Sylvanas or Zeus. And it makes it to where you could see team fights or something going on in front of you a lot better. You have a more aerial view. And when you have a lower height, when you're playing the shorter gods, it makes it more difficult to see the things that other players can see, causing you to miss out on stuff.
These gods are going to have a better vantage point now from what they had previously.
Correct.
What about the changes to ranked Joust? We're seeing some changes here. They're increasing the second ban phase from 1 to 2 bans, which means their total bans in a ranked Joust game are going to be from 3 to 4. That doesn't seem like a lot when you've got almost 100 gods in the game, but what gods are we going to see more bans for than we did before now that people have more choices?
I could definitely see Baron Samedi being banned out, along with the typical ones like Nox or Bacchus and Ares and probably Chernabog. And definitely got to get that Thoth out of there as well.
Absolutely. He's no fun in a closed-in Joust map like that. Now, I know one of your favorite game modes to play is Jungle Practice, and we've got some changes coming to that as well. Jungle Practice has added a pad for players to add protections to Odin bots, and they've added a pad for players to spawn minion waves in the tower and Phoenix area. What are these changes going to do for players like you who like to go in here and mathematize the game a little bit?
I believe the correct term would be theory craft, but it is going to make it more realistic when you have the ability to be able to add things to Odin or add protections to Odin. So it's going to make it to where if you're going to want to put more pen in a build or less pen in a build, because when you're fighting something that has not a lot of protections on it, is it really going to be useful?
Patch 514 is also bringing us a plethora of bug fixes to tweak some of the little things that cropped up with the midseason patch. Flash Phoenixes have been fixed to have the correct death animations and attack animations so that people aren't quite so confused. And speaking of confusion, the Joust XP camp is now going to correctly appear as tigers and not cyclopses. We're getting the tigers we were promised. Fountains will now only heal or damage gods, which I didn't realize was a problem. I didn't know that minions were wandering into the fountains, but I'm glad that they're addressing it. They've also fixed an issue where some percentage increase or decrease effects were not additive. For example, an item with 20% increased damage dealt and 15% damage dealt should result in a 35% damage dealt. The particular items they fixed were Sundering Spear, Runeforged Hammer, and the abilities Bakasura's Takedown and Artemis's Still Target. What does this mean for players who are not as familiar with this type of functioning in-game?
Well, it's basic math. So if you have something that has a base amount, it should add to something else that gives a base amount as well.
And before that, it was just taking the largest of the two numbers, from what I understand?
Yes.
That's certainly not good. Some good things, though, are the additional bug fixes for Ethereal Staff. Fixed an issue where a god could have more than 3 debuff stacks if multiple opponents had E-Staff. I can imagine that might have been a problem. Apwash, they're fixing an issue where his ultimate is damaging structures. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not a hot fix. You can still damage structures with Apwash until the patch comes out next week.
Take advantage while you can.
Speaking of take advantage while you can, Chernobog can no longer recall to base while inside of a wall. Shout out to whoever made them have to fix that. That's some creative thinking right there. The Morgan ultimate now copies the target god's item stack number and evolved items. You mean to tell me that for as long as the Morgan's been out, she hasn't been doing this already? Or is this a new problem?
Nope. It's just that she's had a strew of problems. She's released one of the buggiest gods that have ever been released in the game, and people are just continuing to find more bugs with her.
On to the item changes. Atalanta's bow is having an additional 10% movement speed added to the base of the item, while they're decreasing your max stacks from the passive from 4 to 3 and decreasing movement speed per stack from 7 to 5%. What is this going to mean for people who like to use this item, and is this going to add this item into the core builds of any other gods?
I believe Atalanta's bow is more of like a situational thing for people to pick up, especially if they want to have more attack speed. The item itself has some pretty good stacks. It gives you 30 physical power and then 30 attack speed. With the passive it has now, moving some of that movement speed out to constantly be there instead of stacking it is going to make it more appeasing for people to go ahead and pick it up.
Right.
Because you're going to have that 10% right there.
Right. It should make that item more consistent.
Right. And then adding that little bit of extra, if you do manage to stack it, it's just bonus.
Could be an interesting change. Another interesting change in the solo lane is going to be the addition changes to Glad Shield. Gladiator Shield is getting an added effect where basic attacks now heal 0.5% of your maximum health and mana per hit. This can trigger multiple times per ability or basic attack, scaling on number of targets hit with no cooldown. What is this going to mean for some of our favorite basic attacking gods in the solo lane?
This is going to bring some of those back, such as Osiris Boo and Bologna and things like that. If this actually goes pretty well, it's going to be the first item built in solo, and we may even see this item built in jungler and ADC roles as well. So if there is no cap, then you could be regaining a bunch of that back.
And on to the nerfed items, where you have Lono's Mask, which is just killing healers. My goodness. They've added a new sacrifice stat to the passive, reducing 20% healing done. Apparently, everybody was playing Afro support, and that wasn't a cool thing with them. What is this going to do to this item moving forward? Are you even going to bother to pick it up?
All right, so it already frustrates me enough that they keep doing stuff to healers. Healers were out of the meta for a long time. They do some stuff to bring them back in, such as the changes to Guan Yu and some item changes. They finally come back in, but oh my lord, they're too powerful. So they just got to keep moving them back out. It's like, do you want them in or out? You nerfed all the healers at the beginning of season 5, except for Aphrodite because she's a single target versus an AoE healer. Then you finally nerf Aphrodite's healing, and now you're nerfing Rod of Asclepius, one of the best items for healers, and then you're buffing the anti-heal items and the gods who have anti-heal in their kit and adding more people to have anti-heal in their kit, such as Alpwatch. And then you're going to even nerf the item that made it more playable or made healers more playable in the meta, and it's frustrating for people like me who love playing healers like Chang'e, Aphrodite, Guan Yu, and Hell. And where do you want to put your healers, Hi-rez? Please answer that question.
I understand. As a Hell main myself from way back in season 2, and even farther back when she was in the jungle a lot, I miss being able to play Hell and not being shouted out of the lobby. We'll see if
There was a small period, I believe, last season where Hell was actually one of the top gods.
during her rekit, it was a good 2 weeks before they put her back into the ground where she apparently belongs. Speaking of god changes, we have some adjustments to Achilles. His passive on his defensive stance, Gift of the Gods, is getting a health bonus increase from 35 plus 10 per level to 25 plus 15 per level, giving you a total of 325 from the 235 it had before. You're also getting increased protection bonuses from 5 plus 1 per level to 5 plus 1.5 per level, taking you from 25 to 35 protections in your defensive stance. What is this going to do to his power spike throughout the game?
The power spike is not really going to affect. It's just going to make it to where he can actually have more of a pressure late game. Because we all know that he's really good early. He's pretty good mid. But then he kind of falls off late. He becomes too squishy to be able to go in front line and deal the damage he was doing before. So he just kind of like does nothing late game. So this is making it to where he can actually do a little bit more late game. To where he can still build as a jungler should, where he's got some attack base items or ability damaging items instead of just building straight tanking.
Right. His Radiant Glory is also getting a change. Their physical power and protections now scale from 15% to 10 up to 20% at max rank. Again, that quality of life change that you were talking about with making him a little bit more late game. And his combat dodge. Right. And his combat dodge is getting changed from 12 seconds at all ranks to 14 down to 10 on his cooldowns. They're also taking his damage reduced from 55 to 215 to 50 to 210. So a slight nerf? Why?
Yes. His combat dodge was his second, probably, actually, no, it's pretty tied with his other damaging ability as one. Because he could move, deal damage to a wave, and hit you if you were in the wave, and then dodge again and hit you again. It did too much damage, its cooldown was too low, and it just felt like it was up all the time. They nerfed it. So now they're doing a little bit of a nerf again to it to try to bring it to where it's not as so much of as a frustrating factor.
Right.
And with them doing this on top of the, making him more late game efficient, I feel like it's just going to put him in a really good spot.
I think so too. It should smooth out his power curve, and he's going to really bring a lot more to the game. I think you'll see a lot more Achilles played, which could be a good or bad thing depending on what side of the argument you're on, but at least he's not patch release Achilles. We're all grateful for that.
Yes.
Speaking of things we're all grateful for, the Morrigan might be coming back. Her Dark Omen, her primary clearing ability, is going to have increased minion bonus damage from 20 to 80, doubled at all ranks, boys and girls, doubled at all ranks from 40 to 160. Did she really need this much help?
Yes. The Morrigan, when she was released, was the buggiest god in the game, as we mentioned earlier. But she was still played a lot because she brought this really unique factor where she could ult into anybody, use their entire kit, and then go back to herself and be able to do stuff. And one of her biggest issues that she's been having is her clear is not very good, though. She may be able to be really good in team fights, go invisible, do a bunch of damage, especially come late game. They did recently buff her movement speed in her 3 because they nerfed it, but then they made the map bigger, so they buffed it. This is going to just make it to where she's going to be more appealing to play because there was too many people that were out clearing her in lane and she couldn't do anything about it. Me personally, I think she clears fine because of her passive, but people don't seem to understand that. But this is still going to make it a lot better to play because I'm a rank 10 Morgan. I love her to death.
Yeah, she's pretty fun, but like you said, the learning curve is stout.
Yes.
Onto a god whose learning curve is not stout. We're here to talk about Calder, Scotty. Come on, we all know that Calder's the real god here. Scotty just drains him. Calder, my baby, is having a little bit of help with his health regen. They're decreasing the time taken to generate 1 hit point from 10 seconds to 7. This should be helpful in those laning fights where you're trying to put the dog out and bring him back, and put the dog out and bring him back. You're talking about 3 seconds on her Winter Wolf and 1 second on her Piercing Cold. Is this really going to matter?
Yes. So Scotty was released. She was okay. She was dominant. She was okay. She was dominant for a while. You see her picked up all the time, and then she just kind of fell off again. They nerfed her too much. So they're trying to do stuff to bring her back into the game, which is good because I really do enjoy playing Scotty. A lot of people like her. She's a both mid and ADC role god, and she's ability based. By making it to where Calder can regen his hit points more so that he can get back out into the field is really good, especially when she fights people such as Izanami, where they could just really take those points off really fast. And then even though it's only 1 second, it doesn't seem like a lot. A lot of people build her with cooldown. They get the Transcendence, which gives her 10%. They get the Jotun's Wrath, which gives her another 20%. So she's got 30% right there. And then depending what else they build, she may even have more. But Scotty has always been useful for that by taking that 1 second off. But when you start building that cooldown, that 1 second is really going to add up fast.
Sounds like she's going to start being back in the meta again.
Yes, and I'm really excited for that because I really do enjoy Scotty.
Speaking of back into the meta again, we've got some Vulcan changes coming up, don't we?
Yes.
His backfire is now going to go through walls, which, I mean, confuses me a little bit. It's not exactly like it has the range of like a Ra one, for example. Where are you going to find people using that new backfire ability?
I mainly see it on camps or the Pyromancer because it's going to be able to go through those walls, but it's not going to be able to go through the thicker walls.
Okay, and the Inferno Cannon changes here. We've got that it deals damage as if the target had 25% less magical protections. This sounds kind of intense. Did Vulcan need this much change to get back into being picked again?
Vulcan was kind of already starting to get picked again. He was definitely more like probably like an A- god, where he was picked by people who really liked him, or he was just used to try to counter stuff, or a Willix was picked. So by putting this in, it's gonna make it more frustrating for people in mid and jungle during the early stages because they already don't have a lot of protections early. And by taking 25% of those protections away, because they're gonna get hit by that Inferno Cannon unless they really work to avoid it, which can mess up your clear. It's just going to get really frustrating. But I could see where they're going with this. This is the item that doesn't get a whole lot of use because in late game team fight stages, who's up front? You've got your tanky people up front, your guardians and your solo laners. So I could see where they're going to have to change this in the future and scale it. It needs to like start at 5% at rank 1, and then when you put 5 points into it, go up to 25, so 5 at each level. That will lower that frustration factor because I haven't even played this, and I can already tell you I'm frustrated by it.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's going to need some adjustment moving forward, and it wouldn't be the first time Hi-rez has done something like that. Speaking of things Hi-rez needed to undo after they did it, some Freya changes are coming up to her Northern Lights and Aurora Blade abilities. They're decreasing the magical power scaling on Northern Lights from 60 to 50% and taking down the mana cost per shot on Aurora Blade from 25 to 57 down to 20 to 40. What are these changes going to mean for her playstyle moving forward?
So when she first got these changes last patch, she was, brought into the PTS stage. People immediately noticed how much more powerful she is because of you could build poly on her and still do really well at the attack speed, and she was really, really bursty. And Hi-rez was not intending her to be a burst mage. They are more in line with her being a magical ADC. And magical ADCs are not known for having super bursty abilities. So they are decreasing the power scaling on that one to where it's not so bursty, which is good. And then they're making it to where her two does eat a little bit less mana, because even though she could get a lot of mana back by using her melee attacks, it was still eating way too much mana to use her 2 to try to clear the wave. And if they want her to be an ADC, then they're going to have to make it to where she can actually stay in a fight longer than a few seconds, because she's completely out of mana.
Right. So hopefully, I think that she's going to be moving towards that vision that they had, again, as you said, of her being a magical ADC, which is kind of what she had been originally way back in the day. And I'm glad to see her back. She's been out of the meta for too long. Welcome back, Freya. Now, I know everybody is excited for the next part of our show, the Pele release. I just want to remind you guys out there to comment down below, to tweet us at Vir2usGG, or check us out on our Instagram and tell us what you think of this new god Pele and how excited you are for these changes to the game. We're going to start out talking about her Everlasting Flame, her passive. When Pele drops below 50% health, she's going to gain increased physical power lifesteal and ability lifesteal. That passive is going to have a 20-second cooldown. Power is going to be 5 plus 2 per level. She's going to have 40% lifesteal and 20% ability lifesteal. And that duration is going to last 6 seconds, where she's going to have this massive spike in lifesteal. How is that going to affect her playstyle as an assassin with all of that lifesteal?
First of all, I am super excited. A lot of us that play in the jungle have been waiting for a new assassin. The Ravana change into assassin class doesn't count, people. And the last one that we got was Daji. So we're pretty excited to be adding her in. She is the goddess of volcanoes, and she's going to be erupting in. And she is already so much fun to play on PTS. A lot of people have been enjoying playing her. And she's not only seen play in jungle, but we're seeing her being played in solo as well. So we're watching that closely to see how that goes. But her passive is definitely something to make it to where she could stay in fights, because a lot of issues for our junglers is that they go into fights and they, get some abilities off and they have to get out because they get dealt damage to pretty easily. They're not tanky. So by making it to where her abilities do 20% life steal and then her basic attacks do 40%, she's going to be able to stay in sight of those fights longer. So it's definitely a really cool passive.
Very unique, for sure. Her first ability, Pyroclast, is a line attack. When it reaches maximum distance, it's going to hover briefly, return back in pieces, dealing additional damage on the way back. The number of shards that return is going to be dependent on the rank of the ability. She's going to get 2 charges of this ability. Damage is going to be from 60 to 220 plus 60% of your physical power. And the return damage is going to be a flat 20 at all levels plus 10% of your physical power. You have a 60 unit range and a 14-second cooldown. Mana cost is going to be from 40 to 60, which is going to be fairly low, right?
Yes, and this primarily has to do with the fact that when it says it has 2 charges of this ability, you could throw it out twice. So if you throw it out twice, that's 80 mana that it's going to eat. If this was at a higher mana cost, you'd be throwing that out in the beginning of the game, and you basically have to go to back to base already or have mana pawns on you. So that's why it's definitely good to have it at a lower mana cost. Now, keep in mind the 2 charges that it's talking about on your passive meter on the bottom. There's going to be 2 little flowers, and those 2 flowers, if they're both filled up, then you can cast Pyroclast twice.
Very nice.
If they're not full up, you can only fill it once.
Sounds like it's going to be a fun ability. Next up, we have Eruption. This is an AoE ability that she's going to have, causing damage and knock-up to all enemies. At 3rd and 5th ranks, the ability area. At 3rd and 5th ranks, the area is going to expand again after a delay, dealing less damage and a smaller knock-up. She's going to get up to 3 exploding circles at max level. The inner damage of the circle is going to be 100 to 260 plus 80% of her physical power. The outer damage is going to be 80 to 240 plus 60% of her physical power. So slightly less damage, but significantly less scaling on the outer damage. That's where you're really going to lose damage output from the inner to the outer is at the scaling part of your damage. The knockup is going to be from 280 to 200 units. The radius is going to get larger from 15 to 35. You're going to have a 15%. You're going to have a 15-second cooldown and a 60 to 80 mana cost throughout the life of this ability. This is something that Smite really hasn't done before, right?
No, it's definitely a really interesting ability. There is a slight delay before she goes up into the air and then she smashes down and those area of effects come out. The more points you have in, the more circles that are going to appear. So a max of 3. And yes, it was tested. It will probably be fixed. You can charge this and blink, and then it'll go off when you blink. So yes, it has been tested. It will probably be fixed. But if it's not fixed, this is going to be amazing.
That is I am always impressed by the creativity of the Smite community. It is a beautiful thing to watch.
Definitely. But this ability in itself is her only CC ability. She has some slow in her ult, which we'll get into later. But this is her only CC ability. And it is not that big of a knockup. It's kind of almost kind of like a Geb. It's not as big as, say, like the water spout from Hopla. Really can shake up how a team fight goes. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. Something else that'll shake up team fights is her Magma Rush ability. This is going to create an area around her that deals damage to nearby enemies and gives her constant movement speed. You can toggle this ability again to enter an amplified state, where you expend more fuel, but deal more damage and provide additional movement speed for yourself. This ability has no cooldown, but uses a fuel gauge and cannot be activated when below 10 fuel. They're just throwing all kinds of new stuff at us, aren't they?
Definitely.
The damage here is going to be from 20 to 40 plus 10% of your physical power every 0.5 seconds for as long as you have the ability on. Your amplified damage is going to be from 40 to 80 plus 20%, so it's pretty much a straight doubling on the damage from amplified to non-amplified. Your movement speed is going to be 30%, and the amplified speed is going to, again, double to 60% increase in speed. He's going to be zooming. Your initial fuel cost is 5, your mana cost is 10, and of course there is no cooldown, so feel free to turn it on whenever you're ready to zoom.
Definitely a really interesting way to give a jungler a way to get around the map. You can definitely feel that movement speed. If you have speed buff on you, you've got boots and you've got that new mask and you have one of the katanas in your thing, you are zooming down that map if you amplify it. But do keep in mind, it does eat it really fast in that fuel gauge. Your fuel gauge can only go up to 100. So once you get down to 10, anything you have is just kaput.
Right, so they're going to have to use that sparingly to get into or out of specific situations.
Another really interesting thing, this is actually being used as a level 1 ability. So when you are starting in a game to go and clear your jungle camp, they are using their 3 instead of their 1 because it takes every 0.5 seconds and your fuel gauge, it actually like recharges fairly quickly. So it's doing more damage than if you were to level your 1.
Really? I wonder if
Yes.
Hi-rez predicted that.
Probably not.
I know we've talked a little bit about her ultimate. It's going to be one of the coolest ones in the game. Let's talk about Volcanic Lightning. After a short warm-up, Pele is going to dash forward, dealing massive damage, and a slow to the first enemy god hit, dealing additional damage to enemies behind that god in a cone. For the next 10 seconds or 3 attacks, every time Pele hits an enemy with a basic attack, additional damage is going to be dealt behind that enemy as well. Your base damage on this ability is going to be 200, moving up to 520, plus 60% of your physical power. And you're going to get extra damage from 100 to 260 plus 40% of your physical power. Going to have a 60 unit range along with a 30% slow for 6 seconds. 6 very long seconds at 30% slow, believe me. You're going to be able to put that slow out every 90 seconds at all levels for just 100 mana. What do you think of this for an ultimate, Amber?
This ultimate is definitely really, really interesting. So she does this really cool, like, torpedo spin in the air going forward, and then hits somebody and deals that damage, and then she has that cone. So there's some ifs about putting points into that ability because it's only 80 damage more per level, and there's no guarantee that extra damage is going to go off in that cone behind somebody, because if there's nobody behind them, then it's useless. That cone is just kind of there. So some people are debating whether or not putting more points into that is worth it, but going from 200 at rank 1 to 520 at last rank is definitely, appealing, because that's, a 320 increase plus the, 60% power scaling. But it's not useful until you get to the team fight stages. So I don't see people putting points into this rather quickly. They're going to be waiting more towards the late game to be putting points into it. But it's a really, really cool ultimate attack for team fights. And when you get into that team fight, you're passive procs and you're getting those auto attacks off to trigger that extra damage, and you're getting that life steal on. You knock everybody up so you can get that extra damage cone going off in the background. She's definitely got some really, really cool ways. Blink is going to be needed on her, but it's really cool ways to be able to go ahead and get into team fights and do some damage to people.
Sounds like Pele is going to be one of the most rewarding gods we've had out in a long time.
Yes. She's also visually very, very well done. They did some awesome effects on her. Like her kit looks really good. The abilities look really good. Her skin looks really good. Her recolor is fantastic. And she's going to be a lot of fun being played in the current meta.
Sounds like it, but she's not the only new god people are excited about. Let's take it over to the Vir2us News rumor mill and see what data mining has brought us this week.
So we all know that it's rumored whether or not she's the next god or if she's the 100th god to be added into Smite is Hera. Everyone's been really, really excited about Hera. She's Zeus's wife, for those of you who don't know Greek mythology. She is the mother of all gods, basically. And there's not anything out on what her kit's going to be. We don't know what we don't know what her kit's going to be. We don't know what class she's going to be in. A lot of people are speculating that she'll probably be a mage, but we're really excited to see Hera added in. I really do hope she's the 100th god, because having mother of all gods be your 100th god sounds a lot cooler than the 98th god.
It sure does. Well, Amber, I want to thank you for your time and your contribution to Vir2us News today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
This concludes our coverage of the Smite 5.14 patch. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and you can leave them below or tweet us at Vir2usGG. From my lovely and talented co-host, Miss Amber, and for all the members of Vir2us who helped make this show possible, my name's Pliskin, and I'll see you next patch on Vir2us News.